You're tuned into Collateral Damage, the military families the Family Advocacy Center and Incident Determination Committee leave behind. Voices have been altered, because in this system, honesty has a price. Let's jump into Episode 1, FAP and IDC Unmasked, the system that decides your fate.
All right, so you're probably sitting there thinking, what the heck is FAP? What's IDC? Why should I care?
Yeah, fair enough. You probably haven't heard these terms unless you're really plugged into the military world.
But trust me, if you're a service member, have family in the military, or even if you're just dating someone who serves, this is something you really, really need to understand.
We're talking about the Family Advocacy Program, FAP for short, and the Incident Determination Committee, IDC.
And these two things, well, they play a huge role in how the military handles some really serious issues like domestic violence, child abuse, even neglect within military families.
The idea behind FAP, at least on paper, is pretty straightforward. It's supposed to be the military support system.
Right, preventing these kinds of problems, offering counseling, education, all that good stuff. And if something does happen...
That's where the IDC comes in.
This committee, it's like a team of experts, right?
Yeah.
You've got people from FAP leadership, the command structure, medical professionals, legal folks, even military law enforcement.
All coming together to look at allegations and decide... did something happen here that meets the DoD's definition of abuse or neglect?
Seems pretty thorough, right? Like they're trying to be objective and get a clear picture.
It's meant to be, definitely. The goal is fairness, consistency, making sure the right support is provided.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one.
The way the IDC actually works in practice, well, it doesn't always live up to those ideals. In fact, it can be seriously flawed.
We're talking about potential lack of due process, bias creeping in, maybe even command influence, despite what the regulations say.
One of the sources we dug into put it pretty bluntly. They called the IDC a modern-day star chamber.
Oof, that's heavy.
Right, like this secretive court where decisions are made behind closed doors and people's lives can be completely turned upside down.
In that same source, they made another claim that's even more chilling. They said the IDC openly admits it is not about evidence. It has the power to destroy lives and careers and drive people to suicide.
That's the core of what we want to explore today. How can a system intended to protect families end up being so destructive?
So our mission today is to really peel back the layers on FAP, and especially the IDC. We're going to talk about those flaws, that lack of due process, and why anyone connected to the military should be paying attention.
Let's break it down a bit. So when we talk about FAP, the Family Advocacy Program in the Army.
Yeah, they're basically the first responders when there are concerns about domestic violence, child abuse, neglect in military families.
They provide counseling, education programs, advocacy for victims. They're supposed to work with commanders, law enforcement, community resources.
So ideally, a pretty comprehensive safety net.
Now, the IDC, the Incident Determination Committee, is a different beast.
So they're the ones who step in when those allegations come up. Right. Like, to figure out what actually happened.
Exactly. Typically, you have someone from FAT leadership on the committee, someone from the accused service members command, a medical professional, a JAG representative for the legal side, and someone from law enforcement could be CID, MPs, NCIS, OSI.
Wow, that's quite a lineup. It sounds like they're really trying to get a well-rounded perspective.
It's meant to be objective, standardized, making sure things are handled fairly and consistently across the board.
You'd hope so, right? With such high stakes involved.
The idea is to protect families, hold people accountable when necessary, and ensure everyone gets the help they need.
Sounds good in theory, but...
But in reality, we see some serious challenges.
Like, how much does bias actually play into these decisions? How consistent are they, really, from one base to another?
And what about command influence? Even though it's supposed to be a no-go, does a service member's rank or reputation end up influencing things?
That's scary to even think about. Like, someone's career could be on the line because of their rank. That's not right.
And then you have situations where victims feel like they're not being heard. Their experiences are being minimized, maybe even to protect careers.
That's awful. And then there's the lack of transparency, the fact that things can be so different depending on where you are.
All of that erodes trust in the system.
Okay, so we're seeing some serious cracks in the foundation here. But why should our listeners care about this? Why does this matter to them personally?
Because the IDC can have a massive impact on military families.
Real talk. If this process is messed up, it can lead to more harm, not less.
Victims can be re-traumatized. They might be afraid to speak up because of potential retaliation. They might not get the help they desperately need.
And for spouses and kids, it's even more complicated.
Absolutely. They're often the ones caught in the crosshairs. An IDC decision can affect their safety, their ability to get resources, even their ability to make major life decisions.
Like whether to stay in a relationship, where to live, how to manage financially.
It's not just about the potential victims either.
What about the service members who are accused?
False accusations can happen. Cases can be mishandled. And that can be utterly devastating for a service member's career and their life.
I mean, we're talking potential career-ending consequences.
Exactly. Their reputation is on the line. They could face punishment, even separation from the military. And it's not just about their military career either.
Right, because this can spill over into civilian life, too.
Absolutely. It can affect custody battles, divorce proceedings, their ability to get a job in the civilian world.
So this isn't some abstract legal thing. It has real, tangible consequences for people's lives.
And here's something else to keep in mind. Even if you're just dating someone in the military.
Wait, seriously? It affects dating relationships, too.
Yep. The military's definition of domestic abuse, it can apply even if you're not married or living together.
So even if you're not technically a military family, an IDC decision could have a huge impact on your life.
And it's important to remember the military justice system, it's not the same as the civilian system. Things work differently, and those differences can have huge implications.
Okay, so we've got the background. Now let's talk about what actually happens inside that IDC room. What does this process really look like?
So while the IDC is supposed to consider information from all these different areas, the reality is often more like this.
Go on.
The head of FAP, they're often the main source of information for the committee.
Okay, so it's not like everyone's coming in and telling their story directly to the committee.
Not usually. The information is often secondhand, based on reports, interviews, things like that.
So you could have a situation where the details are getting filtered through several layers before they even reach the committee.
Exactly. And the service member who's being accused, they often have no idea what's going on.
What do you mean?
They might not know the specific evidence being used against them. They might not even have a chance to respond to those allegations.
So they're basically going in blind. That's terrifying.
It's incredibly unfair. One source we talked to said it's like being defenseless against an invisible threat.
Because you don't even know what you're up against.
And without that direct involvement from the accused, how can you be sure the evidence is accurate?
Or even complete. Like, what if there's another side to the story that the committee never even hears?
That's the problem. There's a huge risk of getting a one-sided, potentially distorted view of what actually happened.
So you have this system that's meant to find the truth, but it's not actually set up to get the full picture.
And that makes it really vulnerable to manipulation.
Especially when you consider something called DARVO.
Right, this is something everyone needs to understand. DARVO stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse Victim, and Offender.
Okay, I've never heard that before.
It's a tactic that abusers use, basically a playbook for how to manipulate the system.
So how does it work?
First, they deny everything. I never did it. It never happened.
Okay, that's pretty standard.
Then they attack the victim's credibility. They're lying. They're unstable. They're just trying to get back at me.
Classic deflection.
And the final step is to reverse the roles. They paint themselves as the victim, the one who's being wronged, and they make the real victim look like the aggressor.
So twisted. But how does this play out in an actual FAP-IDC investigation?
Let's say you have a service member who's been controlling and coercive in their relationship. The partner finally reports domestic violence.
And what happens?
The service member, they deny everything, of course. They stay calm. They act rational.
Playing it cool.
And they might say things like, my partner is just overly emotional. They always blow things out of proportion. They're making this up to hurt me.
So they're basically using the victim's emotional state against them.
Exactly. And they might even cherry pick evidence, pull out a few text messages that make the partner look bad while hiding all the stuff that shows their own abusive behavior.
So it becomes this battle of perceptions. Whose seems more believable?
And often, the calm, collected abuser comes across as more credible than the victim who's understandably distressed and traumatized.
Because trauma doesn't always look neat and tidy.
Right. Victims might have trouble remembering details perfectly, or they might be emotional when they're telling their story.
Which can easily be misinterpreted by people who don't understand how trauma works.
And then you have this he said, she said situation where the IDC is trying to figure out who to believe.
Which is impossible to do fairly when you're dealing with DARVO.
It's a recipe for disaster. The real victim can end up being labeled as the abuser, facing consequences, while the actual abuser gets away with it.
And all because they were able to manipulate the system.
The subjectivity of the IDC findings is a huge problem here.
Because it's not like a court of law where you have all these rules of evidence and due process.
Right. The IDC often relies on secondhand information. There's no guarantee that the committee members have training in recognizing abuse dynamics or manipulative tactics.
So someone's life can be changed forever based on a decision that might be influenced by bias, incomplete information, or just plain lack of understanding.
And the consequences, as we've said, are not to be taken lightly.
Let's be clear about what can happen when an IDC substantiates an allegation. What does that actually mean for the service member?
It means they've been officially labeled as an abuser.
And that label sticks with them.
Their name can go on a central registry, which can impact their ability to get promoted, get security clearances, even get certain assignments.
So it can effectively end their military career.
The command can also take action, non-judicial punishment, administrative actions.
They could even be kicked out of the military.
It's not just about the military either. This can follow them into civilian life.
Right. Custody battles, divorce, getting a job, all that stuff can be impacted.
And it's important to remember this isn't a criminal conviction. They haven't been found guilty in a court of law.
But the consequences are just as real.
And appealing an IDC decision is tough.
So you could have this situation where someone's life is completely derailed without a fair chance to defend themselves.
And even if the IDC doesn't substantiate the allegation.
You'd think that would be a good thing, right?
But even then, victims might not feel safe. They might not get the support they need.
Because the system might not recognize the abuse, even if it did happen.
And regardless of the outcome, the entire process is incredibly stressful for everyone involved.
It can cause trauma, financial instability, relationship problems.
It takes a toll.
So for anyone listening who's in a military family or dating someone in the military, what can they do to protect themselves?
First and foremost, if you get involved with FAP for any reason, assume the system is not necessarily on your side.
Whoa, that's blunt.
But it's the truth. Talk to a lawyer immediately.
Someone who really understands military law.
Right. Someone who knows how FAP and the IDC work.
Because this isn't something you want to navigate alone.
Document everything. Keep detailed records of dates, times, conversations, anything that might be relevant.
Like write it all down, take notes.
Exactly. And be very careful about what you say to anyone involved in the investigation.
Because your words can be used against you, even if you didn't mean them that way.
Focus on protecting yourself. That's the priority.
So just to be crystal clear, what does it mean if the IDC decides that you have met criteria as the offender?
It means they believe you abused your partner or a child.
Even if you haven't been charged with a crime?
Yes. And that determination can have all those consequences we've talked about.
Yeah.
Damage to your military career, legal trouble, personal problems.
The big deal.
And appealing it is very difficult.
It's just mind-boggling that this kind of system exists where someone could face such serious accusations without a real chance to defend themselves. Is this even America?
It's a system that needs a serious overhaul.
We've only scratched the surface today.
We'll be doing more deep dives into this in the future.
We'll be talking to people whose lives have been impacted by this system, and we'll dig into the evidence that FAP and the IDC often ignore.
It's going to be intense.
So stay tuned, folks. This conversation is far from over.